What if I told you that the real battle of a Roman soldier began when the war was already over? What happened after the victory is more brutal, more secret, and more revealing than many books dare to tell. Today you will walk with me through the blood-soaked countryside of Rome and discover the hidden rituals, medical horrors, and even the forbidden looting that shaped the most feared war machine in history. The dust of combat still hangs in the air. The ground, once marked by the steady footsteps of legions in formation, is now a carpet of blood, viscera, and human fragments scattered among broken spears, broken shields, and the bodies of men and horses. The smoke from the torches and catapults still rises like a warm mist. And in the midst of this apocalyptic scenario, a strange silence reigns. The sounds that remain are the moans of the wounded, cries for help murmured between broken teeth, names babbled for the last time. Some no longer say anything, just stare at them without a blinking, plunged into shock. If that beginning has already made you imagine the scene as if you were there, then you can't miss the rest of this story. Take the opportunity now to leave your like and subscribe to the channel, because each new video is a portal that takes you even deeper into the hidden secrets of Rome. Your support is what allows us to continue revealing truths that most will never tell. Join us and find out how far the empire was capable of going. Wounds to the abdomen or chest were almost always death sentences. Still, the soldiers tried. Ancient military texts emphasize that this immediate care was not just compassion, it was discipline. Saving a comrade meant preserving the cohesion of the legion. A united army could continue to advance. An army torn apart by trauma was nothing but a broken crowd. There was even an order for help. The survivors were taken to the rear, where a new stage began. The direct confrontation with the horror of war medicine. There, lying on makeshift stretchers made of cloaks and spears, the wounded awaited the Medici, the military doctors. These men were viewed with respect and fear. Their hands, covered in dried blood up to their elbows, determined who would live a few more hours and who would not see the next day rise. The battlefield was transformed into a makeshift hospital called valetudinarium. There were no clean corridors, only dirty tents, tools heated by fire, and the searing sound of men screaming as the cold blade cut open the flesh. The real hell began just when the sword had already been put away. The valetudinarium was not a hospital in the modern sense. Often it was just a hastily erected tent or even a piece of dry ground separated from the camp. The iron and bronze instruments were dipped in wine or boiled water, but there was never any certainty that they would actually be clean. The smell was unmistakable. Sweat, pus, fresh blood, and flesh burned by the red-hot iron used to cauterize. Anesthesia was almost non-existent. When available, they used mandrake, opium, or simply placed a piece of leather between the soldier's teeth so that he would bite until he bled. Many fainted in pain. Others screamed until they lost their voices. Arrows were plucked with long tweezers, tearing muscles and skin in the process. Cuts were sewn with curved needles and vegetable threads, and when the infection took hold, the solution was brutal, direct cauterization. The speed and location of the wound decided life or death. A severed arm still offered some hope. A blow to the abdomen, almost none. And yet some miracles happened. Amputated bones with signs of healing, trepanned skulls that closed again. Even wooden and leather prostheses have been found in excavations. The pain was unbearable, but Roman discipline made even suffering part of the war. But surviving the surgeon's blade didn't mean returning to normal life. Many who left the valetudinarium never returned to the battlefield. They were marked, physically and mentally. Meanwhile, another relentless task began: counting the dead. Each century had an optio, the second in command, responsible for recording absentees, wounded and fallen. The process was cold and painstaking. One name crossed out, another marked as missing, another identified as dead. Each updated line was sent to the primus pilus, the chief centurion, who passed the reports on to the legion's legate. This document had a specific name, Relatio Post Pugnum, the post-battle report. Rome was obsessed with records, and neither mud nor blood interrupted its bureaucracy. The death of a man was not just mourning, it was a chain of administrative consequences, adjusting the troop count, replacing weapons, updating salaries, and even sending letters to families. Each casualty was treated as a military equation. Even the lost weapons were listed: a missing sword, a broken suit of armor, a captured legionary eagle. Everything was written down, replaced, controlled. While the scribes updated blood-stained scrolls, the legion began another dark duty: to dispose of the bodies. For a Roman soldier, dying without a funeral was more terrible than death itself. It meant losing the connection with the gods and the right to memory. Therefore, soon after the removal of the wounded and the delivery of the reports, the darkest ritual began: burial. In practice, there was almost never time or resources for individual burials. Mass graves were dug with shovels, swords, or even with one's bare hands. The bodies were piled up, still dirty with blood, with twisted armor and open eyes fixed in the void. To prevent epidemics, some were covered with quicklime, others burned on makeshift pyres, fed with wood torn from fences, broken shields, or destroyed tents. Cremation was the most honorable practice, reserved mainly for officers. But on the battlefield it became hasty, almost symbolic. The goal was twofold: to honor the dead and to protect the living. The smell of decomposition was unforgiving, and the flies arrived quickly. Burying one's fallen, even anonymously, was also an act of reconciliation with the gods, a silent reminder that the legion still maintained its honor, even in the face of death. But not everyone received the same fate. Ordinary soldiers were thrown into shallow pits, often without identification. When a commander died, everything changed. Death became a political spectacle. It wasn't just the body of a man being buried, it was the image of Rome being preserved before the troops. If the deceased was a centurion, a tribune, or even a general, the burial was transformed into a public ceremony. The troops lined up in silence, the banners were lowered, the shields beat against their chests in a low, almost liturgical sound. The body, when possible, was embalmed. When not, he was cremated, and the ashes placed in ornate urns. Funerals included animal sacrifices, solemn speeches, and even renewed oaths of allegiance to the empire. But deep down, the objective was different: to reinforce that Rome remained intact, even in the face of the death of its leaders. Monuments, stone inscriptions, and altars erected by the legions themselves turned mourning into propaganda. The message was clear: Rome's glory did not end on the battlefield. And what happened to the dead enemies? Their fate varied, according to who they were. If they were people considered civilized, Greeks, Egyptians, or allies of Rome, there was some chance of compassion. Wounded could be collected and treated not out of kindness, but out of utility. They would serve as prisoners, bargaining chips, or even reinforcements in auxiliary troops. But for the so-called barbarians, Germans, Dacians, Parthians, the future was almost always abandonment. The bodies lay where they fell, rotting in the sun, devoured by birds of prey. It wasn't carelessness, it was politics. Rome cared for its own and ignored those who dared to confront it. Often corpses were left exposed on purpose, a silent message: the empire does not forgive even in death. There were even more cruel cases. Captured enemy leaders were preserved as living trophies. Vercingetorix, the great Gallic chieftain, was held prisoner for 6 years before he was paraded in triumph at Rome, chained and defeated. At the end of the parade, he was strangled in silence because even the death of an enemy could serve as a spectacle. Rome transformed every body, friend or foe, into an instrument of power. With the bodies removed and the reports delivered, a new operation began, the recovery of the arsenal. It was the work of the Fabri, engineers and military blacksmiths. They did not wield swords, but without them there was no war. They went around the field collecting everything that could be used: cracked shields, crooked swords, crumpled helmets, spearheads. If it could be repaired, it would return to the fight. Immobile, workshops set up inside the camp, amidst flames and anvils. What was broken was restored. Archaeology confirms it. Shield casts, fragments of repurposed armor, and remains of mobile forges have been found in ancient Roman fields. Nothing was wasted. Even enemy weapons were collected: Dacian spears, Iberian swords, Parthian bows. Some were merged, others were handed over to the auxiliary troops, and the most effective were adopted by the legion itself. But along with the official work came the temptation of looting. Among shields and spears, there were also rings, coins, necklaces, and wine. Officially, all the booty belonged to the general. In practice, many soldiers knew how to hide treasures under their tunic or bury them to retrieve later. Rome was disciplined, but individual ambition always lurked behind the ranks. Serving could ease tensions, but it also created dangerous divisions. One soldier who had fought to the end might return empty-handed, while another, who risked little, carried hidden treasures. This generated resentment, internal fights, and even riots, such as what happened in Lucio Vero's campaign against the Parthians, when the unfair distribution of booty almost turned into war within the camp itself. For this reason, many generals forbade unauthorized looting. Rome was not a hoard, it was a machine of order. The real loot desired by the empire was not rings or coins, but conquered lands, subjugated peoples, and silence imposed on the vanquished. Still, there was something that Rome could not count: trauma. There was no word for what we now call war shock. But it was there, hidden in the eyes of the soldiers who returned silently, in the night screams, in the funerary inscriptions of men who died months later with no visible injuries. For the legion, to admit this was to open cracks in the discipline. Therefore, silence was law. And when it all seemed to be over, the soldiers were still clearing the camp, raising banners, washing weapons, lighting makeshift altars. The message was clear: Rome could bleed, but it never stopped getting up. The price of glory was paid in flesh, bones, and memories that never healed. If this dive has already transformed the way you see Roman war, imagine how much we can still reveal together. I prepared this content to deliver to you what history books almost never show. And now I ask for only one thing in return. Leave your like and subscribe to the channel. This way, you strengthen this work, and in each new video, you will have access to stories that will forever change the way you understand Rome and the ancient world.